And I am Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
And this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we're really excited that you're here.
Yeah, that's great. Let's get into the topic.
All right. No fun talking around tonight. We're just
I've
going to
had
jump straight
nothing good
in.
to say at the end of those for like weeks now. So I thought, what if we just treated it like normal for once? Like, what if we just like, hey, let's go?
Let's do it. So tonight we're going to talk some thematic stuff about a show that I have not seen yet.
So Scott's going to have a
Um,
lot to offer.
so
But he will
I,
ask
I, I'm
questions.
coming into this horribly curious and ready to ask some good
Oh,
questions.
good.
Jonathan,
Yes.
what is the show? How did you find it? And why did you choose to watch it?
Well, as I was looking through dumpsters in Hollywood, I found this. Just kidding. It's a.
It's the Christmas special!
It's the Christmas special. No. The show we're going to talk about tonight is called Midnight Mass. It is a horror show. Well, it's I say that and it's true, but it's largely a drama show. It's got very religious, faith-based themes, and it is in the horror genre for various reasons. The writer-director, his name is Mike Flanagan, and he is well known now in horror genre circles. He made the film Doctor Sleep, which is a sequel to the movie and book The Shining, based on the same title of the book that Stephen King wrote as a sequel to the book The Shining, called Doctor Sleep. It's actually pretty good. It's one of my, I like that movie actually a fair amount. He made two other Netflix shows, Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. They're anthology series, so they are one season with one set of characters, one story, and then done. And you do another set of characters, another story, and then done. Midnight Mass follows that same idea in the sense of it is a limited series. It is 7 episodes, and you're done. You're not going to go any further with the story. Um, this is different for Mike because the last three things I mentioned, which are probably the most popular, well-known properties that Mike Flanagan has done, are all adaptations. They're adaptations of either older horror stories like The Turn of the Screw or of Stephen King's work like Doctor Sleep. So Mike Flanagan's done a lot of adaptations, and I have to say that I didn't know I watched a Mike Flanagan film when my buddies and I decided we wanted to randomly watch a movie called Hush, which is about a deaf woman who is an author who gets stalked and someone tries to like kidnap her or kill her in her home, and the whole movie's just like she's in her home and she's being stalked by this killer, and it was actually pretty good. It was good enough that you're like, I'll keep watching. It wasn't just straight up bad, and that's Mike Flanagan for you.
Mike Flanagan, you're watching it and
hold
you're
on.
like, hey, it's not that bad. I'll keep going.
Not okay, not like that. I see. Here's the thing. I'm a fan of Mike Flanagan. Like, I'm pretty sure Luke knows about Mike Flanagan because I keep bringing him up. I had Luke watch The Haunting of Hill House, which is my first foray into knowing who Mike Flanagan was and watching a show because I was curious and discovering that I thought it was actually really well done and really appreciated it. And as far as horror goes, I actually enjoy this kind of horror and drama combined. So anyway, all this to say, trying to get to the final bit. Midnight Mass is a very personal, original written work by Mike Flanagan. He was an altar boy in his youth and now is acclaimed atheist, although sometimes, especially seeing his work, it's somewhat agnostic, maybe. Agnosticism versus atheism, somewhere in there is where he seems to reside, but he has a background in Catholicism when he was young. And he, of course, is a writer director who's written a lot of adaptations and now, in this particular case, a very personal original work and has done a very good job, I think, craft wise in all of these properties.
And speaking of craft, there is an interesting kind of video talking with the cinematographer about Haunting of Hill House and how they did lighting and all that kind of stuff. Link below. So if you're interested in that, it's great. Like it was a very interesting little episode thingy about that. So that's cool. They do like yes, they're really good. They're really good at what they do.
So, Scott, did I
Yeah.
actually answer your question, or did I somehow give
believe
a lot of information that did not answer your question?
So, I guess getting just back to how you found it, like,
Okay.
is it because of Mr. Flanagan that you found it in the first place?
Largely. So after I got into things like Haunting of Hill House, which I really liked, I became a fan of Mike Flanagan because he did horror in a way that was not completely awful and hopeless and ugly. I thought it was actually really good characters and stuff. So anyway, I became a fan of his. And then after that, and then Dr. Sleep, which I also really enjoyed. I knew his name. I pay attention to when his name shows up. So I had heard that he was making this show, and I did, like, you read an article that says Midnight Mass is what it's called. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. And they say, basically it's gonna have a lot of faith, religious stuff, and it's like a Catholic priest comes back to this island and things happen. And I get, some information, and I would be mostly just concerned because I'd be like, well, it's horror, and he's a proclaimed atheist, and it's gonna be religious themes. Like, I can't imagine anything good's gonna come from this, but at the same time, I've liked his other work. He has far more hope in his stories than lots of other normal director writers rather than just horror writer directors. So I will absolutely give it a shot because he's earned my respect. I will give him a shot. He's done interesting things. So that's how I knew about it. So I finally it comes out on Netflix, and I didn't need to see a trailer. I never watched a trailer for it. It didn't matter to me. It really was the name of Mike Flanagan and the concept. I said, I'll give you a shot. I watched the first episode. I was intrigued. I thought it was good, well done, typical Mike Flanagan fashion. It's good. So, okay, where are you going, man? And then the next night, I watched episodes 2 through 7 in one night. I just binged the whole thing and watched it, and I found it very engaging and entertaining, and was done well in craft. And there's lots to think about and engage with. But I then went immediately to Luke and said, Luke, there are things in here that you are going to want to watch. You need to go check this out. And I told you even, I said, Scott, I think this might be up your alley, although it's horror. So I know it's not up your alley, but also it might be up your alley.
To be honest, I took that and go, if I have time, I need to watch something, I'll watch it. I've not been in that place, to be perfectly honest.
That's fair. That's
I'm
fine.
pretty sure that I did not get my money's worth from A-List here a month or so ago. So, it's probably the first time it's ever happened in my life. Luke, what was it about what Jonathan said that made you actually want to watch this show?
Jonathan said, you should watch this show because I want to talk about it, and that's enough to make me watch a show. I had a person that I've known, for years, but hadn't talked to in a long time, and we connected, and they're like, "Hey, Luke, check out this show because I just finished it. It's really interesting." And so I was like, "Okay, I'll watch it," and I watched that show. So when Jonathan says, "Hey, watch a show," I think you'll be interested, I watched it. That's all it takes is somebody being like, "Hey, I want you to watch this so we can talk about it." Okay, cool. I like watching stuff. So that's it. That's all it took. Now I did have to take some time to find time to do it because I've got kids and stuff. But I actually got through it, I think, in 2 nights. But that's because I watched it at 2x, so that was cool, or 1.5x at times, which enabled me to get through it in only 3-4 hours instead of 7. So I was able to do it in 2 nights in the couple hours I have between bedtime and staying up a little bit too late.
And I don't know that I hinted at this.
Time and staying up late. Okay.
I don't know that I hinted at this hard enough for Luke, but one of the reasons I recommended it to Luke, beyond the fact that I want to talk about it, was I know about Luke's interests and what he likes and doesn't like and things that are interesting to him. And this was a melding of 2 things I knew were interesting to him. And so I was like, you need to watch this. You just this is up your alley. Just check this out.
Yeah. And that was, but truly, it was, you just needed to say, check it out. But yeah, he did mention also that hey, this has got some themes and some other stuff that, it's your stuff. Partly because, in college I wrote a script kind of floating around with some of this stuff too. So, there's that.
Yeah.
So the lesson to learn tonight for all of our viewers is make sure you know who your friends are and if you can trust their recommendations, which is why we always give you, well, we stopped, but we used to always give you recommendations of things to watch. Okay, guys. Luke, I really do want to dive into some of these themes that would especially be something that would be up your alley. So what are the themes that you enjoyed seeing in this series?
Okay, well, I definitely can't tell you that because that's like a spoiler. for the
There's
show.
one thing that's a very big spoiler.
So
We can
one
kind
one
of
of
hint
one
at
of one
it,
of my
but-
one of my wheelhouses, one of my things, is a spoiler. So I can't tell you. Sorry, I think for me the biggest theme of this particular show, the way that I read the show, is that this is a show about how religious fanaticism makes you blind to the destructive tendencies of the group that you are a part of. So there are characters who are, because of their devotion to their religion, but even more than that, their particular like group or experience of, because of that devotion, they're willing to like truly turn turn a blind eye, or like actually just completely ignore the like huge red flags that like horrible things are going down and it's because of you. It's like, and that I think is a recurring theme from one of the characters that is written to be the most hated character in the show, all the way down to like people who are just like, like just kind of sheep along, who are just being led along, right? And so because they're sheeple, they just go along with it. And so you kind of got the whole bandwidth, but the whole band there. But the whole idea is, hey, if you're a fanatic, you're actually doing damage and you don't even realize it. Although I think, judging from other things that the characters say and Flanagan and all that stuff, I think that he would just say religion in general is that way, which I completely disagree with. So there's that, which is why I think that it's far easier to read it as it's actually your fanaticism that's the problem, and not your adherence to a particular belief system.
It's interesting you saying all that. What was your phrase? Can you say your summed up theme again?
Yeah, it is that being a fanatic makes you blind to the ways that your system or your stuff is damaging people.
And it's interesting because for whatever reason, when you said that, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was almost to reverse that. Being blind to the stuff that's destructive leads you to being a fanatic. Like being blind to your own self-destructiveness and just being unwilling to see it leads you to fanaticism, I think is another way I would potentially approach some of the things that happen in this story, because there's a sense of even some of the things that are going on within the parish and with the old pastor and all that, like there's a certain level of people unwilling to see the truth of the matter and they don't want to see that brokenness. And so they're trying to pretend like things can just be okay. And that actually is literally a doorway into things that are going to happen later that's problematic. That's a very small, specific example that I can bring up because it's early on in the story. But I'd say there's even that hated characters. There's a lot of just like, I am blind or willing to turn a blind eye to my issues, to my brokenness, to the self-destructive tendencies that I and others have. And as such, a cycle can, permeate, a system can be created. Fanaticism can be created and pushed further. But that's just a random thought from what you said, not necessarily the fullest theme. I wouldn't necessarily bank on that wholeheartedly. It's just a thought I had. One of the things, maybe not even a theme, but one of the things I definitely noticed when watching through all of this was I never felt that there was really ever a solid Christian position stated by any character. There is a young priest who at times says things that I'm like, that's actually pretty accurate. That's actually pretty close. There are issues with that as well, but there was something about the way I would say it is making faith toothless, making there be like talking about religion and faith and then doing your darndest to essentially by omission or by direct decision, removing any actual thought of a personhood of God, an actual authority, an actual interacting being who is all powerful and in Christianity's case, all loving, and removing that entity, talking about that entity constantly, but every time defining it as something that's not even a person or something distinctly different than you and an all powerful being. And in essence, taking faith and sort of making it a toothless thing, a not what it actually is thing, making it something completely different that then made, in my opinion, I don't think that Flanagan was saying that religion was, for instance, always evil. I think what he was saying is it has great capacity for evil, and I don't think it has any basis with anything. It doesn't have any teeth. It doesn't have any reality, and I don't believe that it has any sort of real God in any way, shape, or form. So much so that all religions don't have a real God, and so as long as you don't actually hold to that, you'll be okay as faith. You're fine. You can do whatever you need to do. Just don't actually believe there's actually a real God, and don't actually act on that. And if you do, you'll be following false teachers, and you'll be following false evil things, and it will lead to destruction. That was one of the major ideas I got from his writing, which I wholeheartedly disagree with and think is not easily dealt with, because I think that he didn't give it any teeth. He didn't actually take any of the presumptions of the actual religions and work off of that. He took that and then said, what if I twisted it over here and made it corrupt, which everyone would agree is corrupt and evil? And then what if I played that out? And yeah, it's fanatical, it's awful, it's horrible. We've seen it outplayed in real life. But there's something about the interplay, like something about the idea of, if faith is toothless, then it's okay. But if it has teeth, in the sense of my definition being there's actually a God that has authority and tells you to do things that are right or wrong, then you are on the path to fanaticism.
Well, I mean that's just typical today views of things. Like that's so milquetoast in its, ideology. Like, it's just like, hey, yeah, don't actually believe anything that's out there, just, follow love, right? Like a few weddings that I've been to that are very much atheist weddings, and it's very interesting having gone to a lot of Christian weddings over the course of my life, and then going to some atheist weddings where it's like, and then that deity that is love, like just love, like this generic thing out there, and again, it's like, on one hand, I actually believe that God is love, right? Because it,
Sure.
But when you make it just love, well, that's a little bit odd then, right? And so, yeah, similarly, I think Flanagan absolutely just falls right into that same ideology because of where he is as a person and in his personal faith walk. And he is at, like, hey, as long as we're loving, everything's good. In fact, that was a line in an article that I saw in passing while we were filming this morning. Like, what's your religion? Whatever believes in love. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Like, it reminds me of the line from the artist in the 60s. He said, all you need is love, and then they broke up. What are you gonna do? Yeah, Larry Norman. Sorry, thank you. That took me a moment. Okay.
So they deal with religions a lot in this, and I know that we all have our particular beliefs, but watching this series affect, or how did your background affect how you watched this series?
Well, okay. One of the things that I do, I teach Sunday school, and one of the things that I do for my 3rd through 6th graders, just about every week that I teach, is I have random Bible question time. I'm like, anything you've ever wanted to know about God or the Bible, let's talk about it, right? I want to do it, and I'm going to give you my understanding, and if I am aware of multiple perspectives, I will give them all to you. And those are my things, and then I'm going to go look it up if I don't know, which rarely happens because I like digging into stuff like this. This is all interesting to me. And so having, like, truly, the number one thing that comes up over and over and over again is the problem of pain in this show. And that's literally the one note. There's other stuff, but it's all connected to that same core idea of the problem of pain. And that's an easy one to pick on because there isn't one great, like, trumping, ace card answer to that problem. Like, that is truly a difficult issue and one to be, to walk through, and that's hard. And Flanagan even, I think, rightly points out some of the difficulty of dealing with it, but that is truly, for me, watching the show, that's his only note. He has nothing else. He has nothing else except for fanaticism, where people do bad things in the name of religion, and problem of pain. How could a loving God allow bad things to happen? That's just not the way that anything can work, and that's not the way it should work. And he actually has a Muslim character in the show, and his whole thing is these miracles aren't real because miracles can't happen, because if miracles did happen, then God would be choosing to do good here and allowing horrible, awful things over here, which again is problem of pain. And so, like, truly, that's the one note over and over again. And because of my background in looking at these kinds of things, that's all. Like I'm like, come on, you got to have more. Like that. I'm not discrediting that is a thorny issue, but that's it. Like, you became an atheist for that. That's it. Okay. I mean, at the same time, I totally understand why that is so destructive to people's worldviews and their religion, because, yeah, how could a loving God do this? I don't understand. And that's messy, especially if people have given you simplistic or moralistic or other kinds of answers that just, like, leave you, like, empty, right? Like, that, it sucks. And I think that too often faith communities will give you, like, the pat answer or whatever, and then people are like, well, that didn't help me at all. I'm out, right? So I don't know, but that being the one and only beat over and over again, aside from, hey, people do bad things, which I'm like, people do bad stuff all the time, no matter where you are. So yeah, don't be a fanatic and don't be mean. Like, that makes sense, right? But problem of pain. That's it. Sorry, that was a long answer to that.
With my personal background being a believer, and I kind of already hinted at some of the main stuff that stood out to me when I said, themes, like, what was I looking at? It's like, you don't have, what Christian character actually knows anything about what the faith is? Who's actually given a strong answer to any of these questions? Who has dealt with the problem of pain in any real substantial way and gives an actual Christian answer to that question? And there are times where, again, certain characters say things that are very familiar to me and are somewhat close to maybe giving an answer to that. But every character, of course, is broken in this story. And that honestly makes a lot of sense. Humans are very broken, which is why the Christian position is that Christ is not. Christ has been physically broken and taken on the sin, right? Like, there's the Christian ethic fundamentally is, I'm broken, but Christ and God is good and is actually making the world a better place in spite of all of us, and is asking us to join in on that through sacrifice and many other things, right? There's a much more bigger thing going on, which is, we're not the heroes. Christ is the hero. God is the hero, and he still is the hero in spite of the problem of pain. And in fact, the problem of pain showing up is just another thing that Christ and God is trying to save us from. Like, there's all that kind of going on. And at the same time, take up your cross and follow him, and pain's going to happen, and get ready for suffering, because that's part of the deal.
And there's actually a great, like there is a great moment in the show where one of the characters is in church, and something's going down in church, and she walks out and she's like, we ain't never going back there. Like, we are not going back. That is not how it is. And that was great. It was so good. And then, like, it was literally dropped, like, the next minute, and they're like back in the church for reasons. It was like so good. And then it was like, and it's gone.
Well, I mean, I do think there are some writing inconsistencies or issues with the story. I also think it's really engaging and really well written. I think it's got some brilliant ideas, and I think it's got some great pacing and some great things going on. I also think that it's got some inconsistencies, and I think it falls in on itself a little bit. It's got some logic holes, amongst other things. And I think it also just has the need to get on with the story. Yeah. So, like, even that, like, I don't know that I think it was dropped as much as it was. By the time that finally happened in the story, we were way too far in all these other stories to ever have the chance to see that play out, because we have to go through all these other things that need to happen now in the story.
Sure.
All this to say, what was my response with my background to the story and the way they dealt with things? I found it brilliant and fascinating how they took different mythological and religious symbols and played around with things. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was a fascinating connection to how things can get twisted. I do not in any way mean to pick on my Catholic brothers and sisters, if you will, my brothers in faith in a different denomination, because I'm a Protestant, I'm a Protestant. But there is a history in various parts of the Catholic Church of treating martyrs and Mary and other beings as higher than I think they ought to be treated, and really taking symbology and really putting a lot of emphasis on symbology, and maybe even praying to things I don't think you really ought to pray to beings you ought not to pray to. That's my personal view as a Protestant and my understanding of Scripture. And knowing that in Catholicism that kind of thing can happen was fascinating to watch something else happen in this story that sort of played on that idea and really like said, well, what if that happened in this way? Then what happens to the Catholic Church? Then what happens to your believers? It's like, well, it's fascinating to watch how that twisting makes sense to someone of a certain mindset and using Scripture, but twisting Scripture constantly. It was just fascinating to watch that play out. There is one monologue at the end of the story that was, and here's the thing, I feel like as a Christian, I deal, like, people of all sorts of beliefs deal with their beliefs being discounted, or deal with their beliefs being belittled, or stories basically saying whatever. And that's, as a Christian, I'm no stranger to that. That kind of stuff happens all the time. Christians are dummies, or the faith isn't really faith, or what have you. It can go 1,000. X-Men Logan, here's a cross. The cross is not a good enough symbol. Let's turn it on its side and make it an X because X-Men. That's kind of insulting, like it's not really, but whatever. But this show found a way to be very fascinating, very engaging, and certainly by the last episodes, found a way to be visceral and deeply insulting. And I don't think it was the intention of Mike Flanagan to insult all believers. I don't think that was his aim, to go out of his way to insult all believers. I don't think that's where he was coming from. But things he wrote and beliefs he has are so contrary to what I believe. And the way that he expressed them was so distinctly shaking his fist at things I hold dear that it was deeply insulting. I don't know that I had been quite insulted like that in media about that in a long time. And at the same time, I still find the show fascinating. I will watch it again. I am not afraid of going through it. And I think Luke's right that in a sense, the problem of pain is the major issue. And yeah, we all deal with the problem of pain. And my fascination is no one ever gives a great answer to the problem of pain, because that's still the issue you're struggling with. And like Luke said, is there a good enough answer to that? Will there ever be a good enough answer to that? And the answers that were given to it from the author were so not milquetoast, but weak, deeply weak, that it fascinates me how people want, and there's another, we read an article, Luke shared with me an article that was a person reviewing the show and their thoughts on it. And that was fascinating because they get comfort and hope from hopelessness. They get comfort and hope from stories that distinctly say there is no hope in this world. It's all useless. There's some sort of hope they get, some sort of comfort they get from that. Now, okay, in a sense, people are different, okay, but that fascinates me. It's so strange. It's so different than where I come from. And in a similar vein, though different, because Mike Flanagan always tries to do something hopeful, and that's where I get to the idea of he may be saying he's an atheist, but I think he's somewhat agnostic because he's looking for some sort of answer to the issue of the problem of pain, and he wants hope, and he always gives his characters hopes in these stories, and it's fascinating to me. But the answer for his hope in all the stories is almost always weak sauce, weak sauce, and that also fascinates me. So sorry, I just ranted for a long time about things that came to my mind. What do you have to say, Scott? Do you have questions? Do you have thoughts?
I mean, I'm trying to process what you're saying, and I really am. I mean, I really would be more curious to sit down and talk with Mike and just kind of figure out, okay, what was your experience and why have you come to this conclusion? Obviously, that's the philosopher and maybe a little bit of a pastor in me that's more curious about the person. But we all get to certain beliefs in our life from either pain that we experience, or because it's forced to us in a certain sense, or because it makes us feel a certain way or anything like that. So I'm really curious, like, is the intent of making something like this to try and make other people feel the same way you do, or just to try and let people know how you actually feel based on your experience?
I mean, if I had to guess, it's far more. This is him processing, right? Because it's a personal thing, and there are like what he's expressing is not stuff that no one else has ever thought.
No.
This is a common. This is out there. This is a thing, and it is like really common, and I think that's important to know, right? This isn't something like, oh, I think it's more like there you're not alone. If you're feeling this way, you're not alone. You're not alone in that. And I think if I was going to have a response to that from our viewers here, if you're watching this and for some reason, like you're not alone in having that, and there are answers. Are they going to satisfy you? I don't know, but there are absolutely answers. And one of the things that we talked about, Jonathan and I, is that it's really easy to just kind of be a generic, like, surface level believer in something. And I have the privilege of having spent a lot of time studying also in college and, before that. And so I have a certain level of knowledge, and I continue to dig deeper and deeper into scholarship on stuff. And so I have this depth of knowledge there that I can draw on for this stuff. Whereas if all that you ever did was go and like ring the bell and like serve things and like listen to people say stuff, like, the little chances, like I could see how you'd be like, yeah, there's nothing here. It's all just ritual and whatever. And that is not just Catholicism. That is absolutely Christian churches. That's my Jewish friend who's like, I grew up, I could sing all the songs, I could do all the stuff in the original Hebrew, and I had no idea what we were talking about, right? I am not picking on any particular religion. I'm just saying that it is very easy for us to get a surface level understanding of something, and there is more. There's more, and it's awesome.
And a couple things. I want to say that, again, I still really like Mike Flanagan as a writer, as a director, and I'm happy that he took the time to express his feelings and thoughts and personal things. And my belief that answers are weak sauce will not change, but I still appreciate that he took the time to do it. And I think that he approached this story and wrote in such a way that it's brilliant and engaging and entertaining. And I think he also didn't take the easy way out. He didn't make easy choices of making things villains that are in a very cheesy, easy way that other stories do, who are also dealing with the same problem. He understood because it's personal. He understands the textures of people in these different communities and these different sort of real life things. He understands a little bit of how things can get twisted in a much deeper way, a much more kind-hearted way, if you will, even though there's horrible ends. And I really appreciate that about his work in this and in everything that he does. But I really appreciate that about him and how he did that. And that's part of why I'm willing to go through it, even though I yelled at the screen at one point. Like, I'm happy to go through it again because there's something deeper going on there, and I appreciate that respect and that understanding on those things about human beings and those other things at play here. The other thing that comes to my mind with it all, as we keep talking, and now it's this discussion, because it could not, like, becomes about faith and problem, pain, all these other things, is there is an assumption by many of the characters, one character in particular, that the unexplainable leads to and creates religion. That you can't understand something, so you basically make a deity for it, and it's a human invention, and as such, everything from religion needs to evolve, or is going to be broken, or whatnot. And one thing that I don't think got enough credence, or should be understood, is that deep faith actually is a belief that there is something called revelation happening, where it's not just us trying to be rational and using our brains to understand things, which we do, but because there are limits to that, there is also a revelation given, as in God or someone, something comes and gives you the information that you did not have before and that you cannot simply observe. That's where a lot of faith comes from. And even in this story, it personifies a sense of that kind of revelation, but in a very twisted, dark way, which again is a twisting of actual revelation and playing with it with things. So it's again very fascinating. But one of the things that I just always, let me put it this way: there is such a belief that you observe and you make decisions, and that's how you believe things. And I understand that. I think you should be rational. You should study it. You need to. And Luke's talking about surface level believer. Absolutely dig deeper. But there's also a certain point where it doesn't matter how far you dig, in some regards, because if you've already chosen what you believe, if you've already made the presumption up here that there can't be revelation, there can only be observation, then you won't accept anything that is different than what you observe. Like you've already made that decision. It's kind of fascinating how, in my mind at least, very, very deeply, while I believe there's absolutely an importance to apologetics, while I believe there's actually really deep reasons for why we believe what we believe that are solid, a person of faith in something quote unquote wrong, of no faith, but then faith in that there is no faith, like whatever you believe in, you've got to make that choice somewhere deep down in a foundational level, and you've made your choice. And then from that point on, it's very easy to see everything through that lens. Nothing can ever convince you otherwise because you've already made the foundational choice. It can't be, it can be, it must be, it won't be. Like that's foundational, and it's really hard. And so, yeah, fanaticism is a really dark end to believing in revelation. But does that mean that revelation is automatically fanatical? Like that's a real question, and I don't know that it ever really goes there. But like, those are the kinds of things that my mind gets to when I watch the show, and that's part of why I love it. Is even if he's not trying to talk about that specifically, I am spurred on so many different ideas to talk about this, that, or the other.
Sure. That kind of leads me to the question of, do you think he just didn't handle it completely, or was he more just trying to get us to have the conversation and figure it out from there? Like, what would be changed, or what would you have added to the series to more completely discuss it? Or is he literally just trying to give us the introduction to go deeper?
I don't know about that. Question presumes two intentions from him that I'm not sure he had either of. I really do agree that I think it is very much him processing and coming up with a story and then trying to express what he currently believes about it all. And so I do think there is a sort of statement from him by the end of what he thinks about these things, even though I don't think it's necessarily so super duper polished or finished or full. And certainly I have my beliefs, which are absolutely disagreeing with him. So maybe they could never seem full to me because I don't agree. But I think he's making a statement by the end of the story. But I don't know that he even thinks that he's making a full-fledged end-all, be-all statement about everything. But I do think he's expressing where he's at, what he's thought about, and where he's currently at with that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I don't know if he's interested in dialogue or discussion or pushing further or anything like that. I think it is far more of a expression of, this is how I got to where I am. This is where I am right now. This is the kind of my thesis statement, if you will, of the world and how it works. I don't think he's trying to push for anything beyond that. And that's fine. I don't think you need to. That it's just he's making something where he's able to express, as Jonathan has said, this is a personal story for him. So he's expressing this personal thing, and it drives a lot, and there is a lot behind it because there's so much reality of his own life in there somewhere, right? And that's great. That's good art. And then it's great art because it sparks people to then have their discussions and thoughts and things beyond that, right? Because that's what good art should do, is to, I like the thing that said, great art is the thing that asks the right, makes you ask questions or makes you think about things. It's not the thing that gives answers. It's the thing that asks the right questions so that you then go looking for them, right? So I don't know.
And they often say with writing, and specifically with writing movies, that if you can be, the more specific you can be with a story, the more you can dial into something specifically and uniquely, the more that will likely be, in a sense, universal, or that will hit everybody, or everyone will have some thought about that. And, in this case, potentially have discussions, potentially have thoughts, go somewhere with it. And that's because it's a fantastical story. And again, he's, giving answers. He's got a statement. Every author has a presumption, a thought, a worldview. It comes out whether you try to or not. If you try to, it's preachy. If you don't try to, it just comes out. That's what happens.
Sure.
So I think it's just very personal, very specific, and that's why it hits so well on different issues, even though it's 1,000 different things.
All right. Now, I know you guys have said that, there's not going to be another season for whatever reason, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But where could he go from here? Like, did he leave himself room to continue the thought process, continue the processing, continue his story? Or is this the complete thought, don't think about it ever again, just let it go?
No, I think because he does anthology stuff, as Jonathan said, but seasonal anthologies. He does seasons. It's one unique thing, but it's all talking about the same kind of stuff. Oh, he can keep going. It's just this particular world is done. This is done. But could he go elsewhere and explore it in other ways? Absolutely, and he has. From what I've seen, which I have not seen as much as Jonathan, but yes, he is absolutely beating around these bushes and seeing what falls out. Like
to exemplify, the very nature of horror is supernatural a lot of the times. It can be a slasher, it can be something else, but he does not do that kind of horror. He does ghost stories and supernatural kind of horror. So he's always dealing with an element of the mystical, the supernatural, the unexplained. He's almost always dealing with some sort of a character or thematics of addiction and often alcoholism. He's had his own struggle with that. That's constant. Like, these are themes that have already been there a long time. The thing, to try to get more to what you're asking, I am curious if he'll ever, I don't think he'll do Midnight Masses worldly. I mean, maybe he'll come to it 10 years or whatever from now and be like, you know what? I got more I want to do in that universe. And fine. And then, it's his work. Do what you want to do. If you got more to say more. But I would be very curious if he ever goes back to the Catholic Church, because I think that he made the story in such a way that he could go address specifically, amongst other things, the Catholic Church and his experience with it. So I haven't seen the Catholic Church in a strong way show up in any of his other work. Maybe ideas or things that come from that, but certainly not like this, where literally the entire show is half or more dealing with an in-Catholic Church. You are dealing with that kind of stuff. And so I wonder if this was his way to create a story, a world where he could go deal with that specifically. And now he's walking away from that. And even though he'll probably deal with religion, he'll probably deal with faith, and he'll probably deal with the unexplained and alcoholism and addiction and all this stuff that he already's been dealing with, I think that will always show up, because that's who he is. But will the Catholic Church specifically show up in a big way in any other story? I don't know. I wonder if this was his way to do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it has mass in the title, and you go to a lot of masses in this.
You do. You do.
All right. Give me your quick shot at why I should watch this series. Like, if you could sum up your thoughts on this series and say, here's why you should watch it, what is that?
You specifically, or just like the general audience you?
The you.
I mean, me and them. We're all here.
It gets more specific for you, Scott, as opposed to just everybody. I'm just saying.
No, I understand that, and I mean, convince me. But
Okay.
do it in such a way that other people can connect as well.
Hey, as Jonathan just said, the more specific you can make it, Jonathan, the more universally applicable it will be.
Okay. Are you going first, or am I going first?
Okay, I'll go first. And I think we've already said it multiple times, but basically, if you are interested in watching broken people wrestle with kind of their situation in life and see how that plays out interestingly and very cleverly from a thematic standpoint of faith, Catholicism, church, and the interpersonal issues that can arise from all that, if you've ever felt hurt by a church experience and you are interested in how does this all work together, and you have a affinity for like weird Bible stuff getting pulled into interesting mythology worlds and all that kind of stuff. Man, this show's going to be a blast because it is. They really do a really good job of it. Also, building up a world where you've got people of faith and miracles start happening and it's all rosy and amazing except that it's absolutely grotesque and horrible and dark is very impressive. And if you're like that sounds interesting, well then it will be. Go push play on that. So that's what I'd say. Yeah, give that a go.
I think Lucas said a lot of that very, very well. What I will say is I know for a fact I would not recommend this to everybody. I just straight up would not recommend this to everybody. I don't think everybody should watch this. And I think that it gets very dark and it gets very harsh. And I don't think everybody needs or wants to go through that. But for you specifically, Scott, what I would say is that it's a few things. One of the things I told Luke was I do believe, and I think it probably will, be something of a touchstone for individuals who love horror and have their own experiences with church, their own experiences with life and whatnot. And I think it's going to be something of a touchstone piece of work for them, something that can be referenced, something that can be talked about, some places of common ground of belief and feeling and thinking, where I think a lot of people will probably resonate with a lot of the things that are mentioned and done in here. And so for that reason alone, I think there's a value to it if you're willing to wade through it, because I think that you might find yourself not only getting into the headspace of somebody different than you by the work of art and seeing how they view the world, even though you disagree, and seeing how cleverly things are twisted and how like there's something valuable about getting that headspace. You know, we talk about empathy or reading other books and trying to get in people's headspace. This is a work of fiction and basically a 7-hour movie that allows you to get in the headspace of somebody else in a very entertaining and clever way, a very brilliant way in the genre of horror. And people who like horror are going to really resonate to that. And it could be a way, a touchstone to communicate about things, to share about, you know, what's going on and just to get in someone's headspace. 2, if you like good writing, like if you think things are interesting, if you like things that are clever and brilliant, just not only thematically, but a concept of what to do. And that's the thing, is we haven't really told you what the actual real concept of this whole entire show is. And we're not going to, because it's such a good idea. And it's so important that you don't know until you watch what the actual concept of it is. That if you are anyway a horror fan or a religious fan, like religion, if you have religious interest and you like horror, classic horror stuff, there is a melding here that has not been done before. And it's brilliant in a modern context. And for you, Scott, specifically as a philosopher, as a religious man, as a guy who loves movies and stories, and who actually doesn't really like horror, there are horrible things, atrocities, and some jump scares. But this is not your typical horror. This is not torture for torture's sake. This is not slashers running around. This isn't even a bunch of ghosts and a bunch of ghost scares. This is using horror elements and horror icons and different things like that to walk through drama and character and religion and philosophy. That's what this is all about. And I think that you would probably eat it up, but at the same time, I would completely understand if it's too scary, too dark, or not of interest. Completely would understand.
Okay. Well, just let me know when those jump scares are coming, and I think we'll be good. All righty. Thanks for joining us. We will catch you again next time.
That we will.